This is the Child Discipleship Podcast powered by Awana. I'm Ross. You know who you are. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here, guys. Oh, man. I look forward to having these kinds of conversations each and every year. This is one of the most important things that I get a chance to talk about. And today, we're going to talk about the foster care community and child discipleship. I am joined by Tracee and Kayla, as well as Melanie. So Tracee Rudd is the state director for Colorado Kids Belong, and Kayla Maxey is the family life pastor at Harbor Church. And of course, Melanie Hester works with me here at Awana. Everybody, welcome to the podcast. I am really looking forward to this conversation, guys. I want to just start to back up a little bit, though, because you guys have a unique setup for foster care that we're going to get into in the state of Colorado. But just for a little bit of background information, Tracee, let's start with you. Can you explain to folks what Colorado Kids Belong is? What is the sort of scope of that ministry?
Yes. So Colorado Kids Belong is an organization that started here in Colorado and has now launched across the country. We're in 10 states, actually, I think almost 12 now. And the whole idea is to help change the experience and outcomes for kids in foster care. So we see that that's done in lots of different ways. For one, it's done by recruiting more foster parents to get involved. But we've seen over the years that you can recruit lots of foster parents, but if you don't recruit support for those foster parents, then they'll quit within a year or two. So we want to see foster parents foster stronger and longer. And just this last year, we launched what we call Foster Friendly. So it's a mobile app, but really it's so much more than that. It's a platform for us to collaborate with other nonprofits, with the faith community, and with businesses even, all reaching out to support families that are fostering, because we know that that's how we can change that experience for kids, is by having more than enough people involved. It's
a really innovative and just, I struggle to even find this word doesn't do it justice, but cool. It's a really cool thing that I'm excited to talk about. So Kayla, you are a family life pastor at Harbor Church. Tell folks about Harbor Church. How long have you been in the world of children's ministry?
Yeah. So, Harbor Church is a pretty young church. It's only been around for about 6 years. I have been doing children's ministry for, oh gosh, it makes me sound super old, but I feel like 9 years now, maybe 8. I don't know. You fall into ministry and I don't feel like ministry has like a start date. So,
that sound you heard was just the chorus of listeners shouting amen. So.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So yeah, I've been doing children's ministry for a while here in Colorado at 2 different churches now. So, and Harbor's great. I started here, February 2021. So yeah. It hasn't been too long that I've been at this church.
Now, what was your connection to the foster community more broadly prior to this relationship with Colorado Kids Belong?
Yeah, so I am an active foster parent, just going into my 6th year of being a foster family. And I met Tracee, it was like January, 2021-ish. And I came from a place of like, my husband and I felt called to foster and adopt and whatever God wanted to do in our life that way. But years into it, I kind of was like, this is really hard. And as an individual living this life every day, I knew that we needed more support, more everything, not just for me, but for every family out there. And we have great support. And so I was thinking about those families that didn't. And I actually found Tracee, I think it was Instagram that we connected, because I was following, foster moms follow all those cool foster things out there. And so I just reached out to Tracee and I was like, hey, can we chat? And this was when I was kind of between churches, trying to just figure out what God wanted me to do and how to put all my passions into one thing. So yeah, that's like the broad scope of that. Yeah, I reached out to Tracee to just see how we could do better.
I can literally remember standing on my back deck, pacing back and forth, getting excited as Kayla and I were talking about all the things.
Yeah, it was great. It's been a beautiful partnership. Yeah.
Now, Tracee, for background for folks, what does the foster care system, what does that look like in the state of Colorado?
Yeah, so Colorado is set up where foster care is run county by county instead of state run. So a person that wants to get involved in foster care would either go through a private placement agency, and if so, typically then they're licensed for the whole state, but otherwise you're only licensed for the county you live in, or a count, like depending where I live, we live right by another county, so I could get certified in the other county. But there's probably some pros to it, but also I think there's a lot of hard things that just makes things really spread out and different, but therefore different kids, like the child that we adopted from foster care, we had to go get licensed by his county in order to adopt him because we weren't already licensed through a private placement agency.
Mel and Kayla, I want to lean in here to what I think is kind of the main point of this conversation, which is there's folks who are listening to this who are children's pastors, and they may be going, of course foster care is important. What am I able to do for this child who has already experienced so much, who has already gone through so much trauma, or is going from home to home, or maybe they're only in my club or my ministry context for a short period of time? Mm. And Kayla, I'll start with you, but Mel, I want you to speak to this a bit more broadly here in a second. For you guys with Colorado Kids Belong in your church specifically, you guys have developed something called this wraparound services idea. You guys have made this partnership work. Can you help folks understand what that is and how you've seen that work in your community?
Yeah. So I think everyone thinks about, the kids in foster care and how do we reach them and how do we be a support for them? But really it's the family. And so it's the foster family that is taking these kids in, because we know that true discipleship happens at home and it starts in our homes. I think when Mel and I chatted, I referred to like my home as a foster mom, like is holy ground. And so I want the discipleship to start there and to be a safe place that these kids can land. But it's really hard. And so something beautiful that Colorado Kids Belong does is they partner with faith communities to be wraparound churches or foster friendly churches. And this wraparound ministry, I wrote it down because I didn't want it to mess it up, but it's, and you can correct me, Tracee, if I misspeak, but it really is that word wrap. So it's providing each family with a team that physically, emotionally, spiritually wraps around them like a big old warm hug, with our words, with just how we speak to them, with understanding where they're coming from, with respite. So respite is just fancy word for childcare and babysitting, and acts of service. So that's the A, and then prayer. And so the things that I noticed as a foster parent missing were people checking in on me with those words, with like, hey, I know it's visit day. How can I be praying for you? Or here's a scripture or whatever. Respite is really tricky. It's getting a little bit easier in Colorado, but you have to be background checked. You have to be official, somebody that the agency knows or the county knows in order to watch the children for X amount of time. So that's really hard to find, to just get a break. And then the acts of service to say, okay, leave your dirty laundry physically on your porch and I'm going to pick it up, wash it, and drop it back off. Right. Like, what are those acts of service that are super tangible that we can bring to these families? So it really is the wraparound ministry of physical, tangible, emotional, spiritual support for these families, who then can be filled up to pour into the kids.
So we're going to put this in the show notes, but just to make sure that we get the acronym right, because we're in children's ministry, so we got to make sure we hit the abbreviation right. Can you hit these letters one more time?
Yeah. So WRAP, W, words, R, respite, A, acts of service, and P, prayer.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because actually in the state of Illinois, respite is actually easier. It's one of the few things that I think Illinois foster care has actually gotten, been more innovative in. It's something like common law, or where if the foster parent decides that this is someone who can watch the child, they are able to make that decision for themselves.
That's right.
Now, Mel, I want to come to you here because I want to begin to bring some context around this for our people, right? Because if I'm listening to this and I'm a children's pastor, I may be thinking like, wow, Ross, this sounds cool, but how can we begin to, if I'm a children's pastor listening to this, begin to serve the foster care community in my community more tangibly the way that these guys have in Colorado?
Well, I think our first kind of gut reaction might be to say, okay, what is something I can do? How can I implement? How are the 3 easy steps that I can make this happen? And let's then call ourselves a foster friendly church, and let's then move on to something else. Because that's just what we want in our life, right? Like that's how, in order for us to fit in the most amount of yeses, that's how things have to function, right? So I think my initial response is actually to humanize it and to really sit, and before you create a 3-point plan on what you and your church can do, I think we have to sit down and ask ourselves, one, what does our church community need? And begin to start listening and taking a pulse on who's in your church community, and then who is outside potentially of your church community that you could serve. Because I think that then is the grounding place where you can then launch to actually meet real needs of real people who are helping real kids. Right. And so I really love, Kayla, that you and Tracee met on Instagram, because that's been a place where I've started following America's Kids Belong and Colorado's Kids Belong. And then a couple of people who have kind of jumped into my feed that I loved. Because yes, I absolutely watch reels at time. I'll just call that out. Mm-hmm. But I love when that reel comes up that I'm like, and that happened just the other day. And honestly, I don't remember the account, but it was just, I felt like the Lord was speaking to me through that reel. And yes, I believe he can speak to us through reels.
Yes. All things.
The woman just said, perhaps it's the most common misconception that being able to help a child in foster care is to house them in your home. Mm-hmm. Right. And I just it was that moment too, again, where I was like, ooh, if this isn't something that for me and my family that the Lord has said for right now, yes, go do this. That doesn't mean it's a hard shut door on helping foster kids and families all over the country. So to kind of circle back here, Ross, I think that's the first thing that I'd ask as a children's ministry leader is, perhaps you have families in your church that you didn't even realize are either doing decently well. And I'd like to use the word thriving, not that everything's perfect, but that God is giving them exactly what they need for that day. Mm-hmm. Or perhaps you'll find a family who is drowning, mm-hmm. and then you'll be able to shape it off of that. And so I think I would bounce that back to Kayla and Tracee too, so for the children's ministry leader who is just going to say, okay, fine, I'll consider, and I will ask questions. What are some questions that they should first start asking about getting to know their church community and the people in it?
Yeah, I think it's a great place. We actually encourage people to start with research, which means looking into your community, like you just said, and see who in your community is fostering or has adopted, and see if they're thriving or not. And I would also say, often those families that are stepping in that space to foster, they're probably people that won't admit that they're struggling. They're often the people, just like missionaries that go to a foreign land, often won't say that they're struggling. It's quite similar. Yeah. So kind of leaning in enough to realize okay, they might say they've got it together where they're fine, but that underneath they're doggy paddling like crazy, Yeah. So leaning in that way, I think trauma, understanding and having some trauma sensitivity or trauma awareness is a huge, huge space. When my husband and I first went through foster parent training 6 years ago, that was one of the things that our eyes were really open to, and it actually helped us to just look at our whole community a little bit differently. So I think for people working in the church community, if they can find some stuff to watch and learn about trauma and trauma responses in kids and secondary trauma that's happening for the families that are caring for these kids, that alone will help them have some compassion and empathy that will help them know how to step in. On our website, we actually offer a trauma sensitivity workshop that people can, there's a 1-hour free one, or people can download the whole or sign up for the whole course. There's lots of great resources out there, though, that'll just help pull back the blinders a little bit to see into what it is that's going on, of sleepless nights and tantrums and heartbreak and all those things. And once you know that, you can just kind of lean in a little bit differently.
Yeah, I would say be curious.
Mm-hmm.
As a foster parent, like I'm not offended by any question. Like I'm at this point pretty rough around the edges after being in it for so long, and nothing really surprises me. And so I think just being curious and asking those questions. We actually put out a survey that I sent to all of our families, just saying, do you have any connection to foster care or adoption? And it was super short, super simple. And it gave me a great starting point for, okay, who are these families? Or like, have they adopted earlier in life and they're still, working through that as a family? Like, we know that trauma doesn't go away just because a child's last name changes. And so that was something that we were super intentional about, was just trying to find those first few families who then know more families around them. Also, this is a little creepy, but children's pastors will understand. Take advantage of your check-in. So if families are new and they're coming and they're checking in their kids, they might have a different last name, or they might stumble with like, how do I answer these questions? Yeah. And to be aware of, okay, can I ask a little bit about your family? And that opens door not only to figure out if they're, in this foster care world, but also just a caring of, tell me more about your family. And so I've probably had 3 families come within the last 6 months. And at our check-in desk, when they're checking their kids in for the first time, if they fumble at what last name to put, or if it's 4 different last names, I can kind of intuitively think, okay, this family, there's something different here. And I'm curious and I want to know why. And so it opens conversation for a lot of, tell me about your family. I'd love to hear something. And so I think it starts with those small things of finding the one family that's going to really help you reach those other families, because they're all connected.
Well, Kayla, you're kind of digging into the space of the children's pastor, who is perhaps, instead of standing at that check-in desk and smiling and greeting people or whatever that might look like, perhaps it's the frantically copying the last 45 coloring pages that you need to do, or setting out the goldfish that needed to happen. Yeah. And what I hear you saying is that there's this really intentional time that says, for you to help a family not only feel like they belong in your church, and that this is a place for them to be able to begin to see that this is a safe space to possibly have that vulnerability that Tracee was talking about, where they don't necessarily say, I need help. Yeah. It starts by you being present. Totally. And by you, it also sounds like you're saying, like, leaders might actually have to take the first step forward.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And I mean, we could do a whole nother podcast on the importance of just being prepared so that you can be present, and leading up so other leaders can do those other roles, so that you can be that face that they see at check-in, because that's going to give them so much more peace. And if a child is coming from trauma, to be able to be aware of that with the trainings that are offered, but have that space to walk them into class, to just, like, hold their hand in this new space that could be scary for all of them, for the parents too. I mean, dropping off a kid with trauma to new places, you you expect to get your number flashed up on the screen within the first 15 minutes because you just don't know what to expect. But to be a place of rootedness and groundedness in understanding everyone comes from different circles, different traumas, different everything. And to be able to offer that to families right from the get-go, that's a game changer for sure.
It reminds me of the, what they often say about kids who are neurodiverse or kind of living in that just super incredible different channels that their brains are created in.
Yeah.
And, you know, they say, don't assume that when you've met one neurodiverse child, that you've met all of them, right? All that means is that you've met one neurodiverse child. And it sounds like you're saying the same thing, like just because you've met or have one family who happens to have a foster child or what that looks like, that just means you've met one family and you figured that out. So can we like dive super practical here then, Tracee and Kayla, to like talk about like what will help make a church foster friendly? Like, what does that mean?
I love that question. And that's part of what got me really excited when we rolled out this foster friendly program, is the thought of not only churches becoming foster friendly, but how cool for families that are fostering to be able to realize, oh, there's churches out there that are going to support me and understand me, and I'm going to be drawn to those places. So we keep it pretty simple as far as how a church can become foster friendly. We ask for them to do at least 2 of 3 things. Of course, we'd love it to be all 3, but one would be to be trauma informed. The second would be to offer some kind of support ministry. So like what Kayla's church is doing, they're doing a wraparound type of ministry. Some churches do things like a parent night out event where kids get dropped off and get to have fun. And then the parents get, time to go to dinner or whatever, or sleep. I've had foster parents say, we're just going to go take a nap in the car. I'm like, okay.
Yeah, accurate.
And then our third thing is that it's something that's talked about from the main stage type of thing at a church, that if a family that is fostering or is adopted from foster care is going to go to that church, they want to hear about it. They want to know that it's not just something that's, talked about on a Wednesday night and that's it, but that it's part of the church community. So being trauma informed, doing something supportive, and that it's talked about, and that it's going to look different at every faith community that is foster friendly. It doesn't mean that everybody has to do wraparound. And actually, Kayla's part of a collaborative group that gets together, a faith roundtable, so that multiple churches in the same area getting together on a regular basis to talk about what they're all doing. And I think that creates a cool space too, of where each church can do different things, but they can all help the same community by offering different things. One church doing a parent night out thing and somebody else doing wraparound, and somebody else being able to say, hey, we have somebody in our church that needs wrapped around and you have extra volunteers. Can we share them with our people? And it's really cool to see everybody work together in those roundtable faith groups.
Yeah. I think too, just coming from church perspective, someone could be sitting and they're the children's pastor and they're like, this sounds great. How do I get, the others involved, whether that's a lead pastor or elders or deacons or whoever you need to, put the final stamp on this. Honestly, it starts with prayer. My previous church that I was at, was not so foster friendly. They had great things happening in their church, and foster care just wasn't really one of the things that they put their focus on. So I just at my old church started praying like, okay, God, can you open up doors for this ministry? And it just makes me think of like Nehemiah before he acted, like he took time and prayed and like asked God, like, how do I go to this leader? And I think it just starts with that faithful act of like, if you as a children's pastor are feeling pulled to do something, start with prayer. Because if you want to act just to act, it's probably not going to go well. And if you ask the Spirit to move not only in you as you want to move forward with this, but in the other leaders, if it's meant to be, then that other leader or those other leaders will already kind of be feeling a prompting. And I really do think that the work starts with the Spirit. And so when I then came to this church, I had no idea that the Spirit was already moving in foster care and adoption here. When I took the job, I was like, okay, yeah, this is just part of my life, kind of separated from who I am as a professional, because that's how it was at my old church. But with this one, I immediately met family after family. Even our senior pastor through adoption, foster care have been, growing their family. And so the groundwork had kind of already been done for me, which is easier said than done. But I started praying that prayer years before I even got here of like, let me be in a place where this is important. And instead of God making my old church that place, he brought me to a place where it was already in the framework of the church. And there wasn't anything being done. And I could just kind of swoop everybody up together and say, this is a really good idea. So, yeah.
I love that. Well, I could talk to you three for about the next 12 hours, but for sake of time, I do want to begin to land the plane, because I'm reminded of two things, which is when we talk about child discipleship, the conversation is incomplete unless we mean child discipleship for every child.
Yeah.
And that includes kids in foster care, and that includes their families, and that includes the families of kids like my biological children whose parents have decided to include foster care in their families, right?
Yeah.
And I'm also reminded that this is one of the things that the church is meant to be known for, right? Mm-hmm. Caring for the widows and the orphans is what we are meant to be known for. And in the least problematic, opinion-filled version of this statement, wouldn't it be nice if this was more of what your church was known for? And what I love about what you guys are doing in Colorado, and what I hope folks who are listening are taking from this conversation, is that their church can be known for more things like this. The last thing I want to add for context here is last I looked, there's, I think, 417,000 kids in foster care in America.
Yeah.
And in Illinois, I believe that number is 18,000. I don't know what that number is in Colorado, but I'm at
1,000.
Yeah. Now, the only encouraging thing about that is that means that we need everyone.
Mm-hmm.
It means that when we talk about wraparound services, it means we need everybody, because there is nothing that anyone can do that is not a useful thing to bring to the life of a child in foster care or their families or someone close to them. And yet, when my wife and I would talk to people, and I imagine when you guys would talk to people about your journeys, you would get some version of, oh, wow, that's so great. I could never do that.
Yeah.
Right. And what I usually say to people who say, I could never give up a child is, good. That'd be super weird if you could do that. Right. But yet what I'm reminded of is it draws a distance, right? It creates a level of separation from this community. And what I've heard from all three of you is an encouragement to get closer to this community. So for those who feel ill-equipped, for those who feel this stirring that they've been praying, and now they're like, oh shoot, I should never have pressed play on this podcast. Right? What are those first steps? What are those things that can lead to their church being foster friendly, their church providing wraparound services, whatever handle for their community makes sense, for their church to engage in child discipleship for this community? Tracee, let's start with you, but I would love to hear from all three of you.
Yeah, I think that our organization would love if anybody would reach out. We can walk them through those steps of how to get involved in becoming a foster-friendly church. And we don't think it's a fast process. Several churches have already been doing some of the things, so it's quick for them. But other churches, it's just slow and steady. Just start with a little bit of something. People can reach out through our website, our America's Kids Belong website, and we'd love to walk people through that process. Something that just keeps, it's not exactly on this, but it keeps coming to my mind, is also thinking of these kids from really hard places and that are living through really, really hard things. I want to insert a cuss word, because sometimes it's just totally that.
Yeah. I don't have that E rating on the podcast, Tracee, so I appreciate you filtering it.
Is that it's like thinking of ourselves and wanting to love these children and using the word discipleship and things like that is a little bit like a warm crock pot on warm. Instead of thinking, ooh, I need to disciple these kids while I have a chance. It's let them just see trust, let them see love, let them feel it on the warm setting on the crock pot. And that will probably go farther for some of these kids from hard places than any kind of like, you should love Jesus or whatever would ever go. So just keeping that in mind is important, I think.
That's a really good metaphor, I think.
Yeah, it's great, Tracee.
Yeah. What about for you, Kayla?
Yeah. Well, I always think of, I think it's Matthew 10. Oh, now I'm going to like sound like a fool, but Matthew 10, I think 42, where it says just a cup of cold water. Like if you just give, you can cross-reference this. But Jesus says like, if you just give a cup of cold water in my name, then you're doing it. Like that's paraphrase, you're crushing it. And I think often as churches, we overthink things and we think it has to have this, grandiose plan and the perfect budget and spreadsheet and how we're going to make this sustainable for years and whatever, like we could process it forever. But if just a cold glass of water is all your church can give at this moment, that's good. And that's enough. And that is holy. And so I think start small, whether it's finding that one family in your church that has a connection to this world of foster care and adoption, find them and take them out for coffee, listen to their story. Like it just starts with one glass of water, I think. I love that we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We found Colorado Kids Belong and they were like, here's what we've seen working for other churches. So I'm not having to come up with this creative ministry like that's used in other places, but like the systems are out there. I feel like in every city, town, or state, there's something happening that your church can jump on board with so that you don't have to be the creative one. You just have to be the obedient one. And a lot of times as pastors, we get stuck in our head of like, I need this idea. I need to be the creative one. No, you don't. Just jump on board with what someone else is doing because what they're doing is probably pretty good. And so that's what I loved about our connection with Colorado Kids Belong is they told us, okay, this is what we've seen work. This is what other churches around you guys are doing. And so we could just kind of ease our way in and jump on board with what they had already learned. And so I think that don't overthink it. Like just one cup of cold water out of obedience is really beautiful. And God will multiply that for sure.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. I want to just sit in a second with what Tracee and Kayla just said. The first thing that Tracee said was, let's remember that this is the long game, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is not supposed to be something that you can, from like ideation to implementation, be done in a span of 2 months, right? Like this is a long game. Mm-hmm. And children's ministry leaders, that is discipleship. Mm-hmm. Discipleship is a long game. So let's remember that it's a long game. And then Kayla coming in with her wisdom of you don't have to be the creative one. You just need to be the obedient one.
Yeah.
And so those two things, if you walk into your church on Sunday morning and remember that it's about the long game and that you just need to be obedient, then that might look like what happened in my church just a couple of weeks ago. So many of you know that I teach 4s and 5s every week. And we had a family come in who dropped off 2 wonderful little girls in our classroom that one of them was, she she was basically select mute, and there just was not a whole lot of understanding around what she could hear. And the other one had some significant developmental delays. And the parents just looked at us, and the co-teacher and I were like, okay, like, we want to do whatever we can. Like, how can we help you? And that went through a course of things of like, at this point, give us a call. Don't push it anymore, right? It was a very clear conversation with a family I'd never met around expectations and what they need and what their kids need. And then do you know what happened? My co-teacher and I threw everything out the window as far as what we had planned, because our entire goal for that room was to welcome those two girls in a space where they felt known, they felt loved, and that they could experience Jesus in a way that he meant for them that day. And I'm not going to be the one to tell you, because it wasn't true, that it wasn't chaotic, and that it didn't feel like there were moments where this teacher and I were like, oh my goodness, okay, let's just pivot. Let's just keep pivoting. But when every child had left that classroom and we grabbed some water and took a deep breath, I would say, like, that exactly what Tracee and Kayla just said, of we were so grateful that for somehow in just that small moment, God was going to use that in these girls' lives, and that we just chose to be obedient. And so you might not have an entire system set up to where you quite yet can be creating a strategic plan for how many families you can wrap around this year, but that can come. Mm-hmm. So for just this week, make your mini goal to just welcome the child who might not fit into the mold that you've created, and see what God can do through that obedience.
Yeah, I love that. I often think of this picture of a lake, and you throw a rock in, and you're just throwing in one rock, but the ripple that goes all the way out to the shore. And I think that's what we get to do here, is just what you're saying, is we get to welcome that one kid, and we don't know what the ripple effect is going to be, or we get to wrap around that one family. And if one family becomes more sustainable, then they can encourage other families to be more sustainable as foster families, and then others and others. And then all of a sudden there's, who knows how many kids impacted because you made that one ripple that goes all the way out until, you can't see it anymore. I think that's just a really beautiful thing, is it doesn't have to be a big thing, because it's a big thing to that one family or that one kid.
Totally.
Amen to that.